My name is Simon Bronner, Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences and former Dean of the College of General Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. It is my distinct honor tonight to welcome you to this special public forum on the state of education in the United States with former U.S. Secretaries of Education Arne Duncan and Margaret Spellings. The event is sponsored by the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership and hosted by UWM at Waukesha. It is presented as part of the Distinguished Lecture Series to the community organized annually by the Student Advocates Association of this campus. Credit is also due for their support to our institutional partners, the UWM at Waukesha Foundation, which gives out a host of scholarships and other programs, and the Southeast Wisconsin Festival of Books. Both of these organizations' work supporting education and literacy will continue with the Waukesha County Community Foundation under the direction of President Melissa Baxter. This forum, like others before it, is in line with the college's outreach mission of civic engagement with our communities on issues of public concern and providing ample opportunities both inside and outside the classroom for learning and participatory experiences toward building a civil society. I want to be sure to recognize leaders from the college who brought it to fruition. Courtney O'Connell is our Assistant Dean for Student Affairs. Courtney? I think she's outside. Dr. Ron Galata is our Interim Dean as well as Outstanding Professor of Sociology. Dr. Galata? Holly Johnson is Director of Continuing Education, and Tricia Kortzel is our Executive Assistant, who give their regrets for not being here. In addition, tonight you will see assistance from many of our world-class faculty, staff, students, and even alumni and former staff who return to us here. Kristen, that's you. They are our future leaders whose educational experience will shape our society. Tonight's presentation has attracted great interest from both our institution and outside of it, and it will be live streamed. Let me share a few housekeeping notes. Please take a moment to silence or turn off your cell phones and refrain from flash photography. There will be an opportunity for your questions and comments after a 40-minute period of discussion with prompts that I, as moderator, will provide. Once you are recognized in the Q&A session, please wait for staff members to provide you with a microphone so your question can be heard on the recording. Toward the goal of civil discourse, please refer to UWM's guidelines on the back of your programs. We've been thrilled to work with the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership for several years, named after Wisconsin's former governor, and incidentally, Secretaries back there, a former cabinet member himself. And we're delighted to work closely with Associate Director Ruth Brash to bring this event to you. We're grateful for the Speaker Grant Program that made these events possible. To give you more an idea of the center's important work, I want to introduce you to its director, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Alexander Tak. He holds the PhD in political science from Stanford University and is an expert on American judicial politics. His work has been featured in Public Opinion Quarterly, Political Analysis, and American Political Science Review. Please welcome Dr. Tak.
All right, good evening, and thank you, Simon. The Thompson Center has been delighted to be able to sponsor tonight's event and work with UWM Waukesha to make this possible. Thank you, Arne and Margaret, for joining us, and thank you, Simon, and everyone here at UWM Waukesha, as well as Ruth and Lily at the Thompson Center for all you've done to make this happen. Let me briefly explain what the Thompson Center is for those who may be unfamiliar with it. The Thompson Center was established to follow in the footsteps of Governor Tommy Thompson, who proudly worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance the public good. In seeking to carry on Governor Thompson's legacy, the Thompson Center works to foster effective public leadership by offering public events, funding research and scholarships, and conducting other activities across the UW system. Tonight's event is a great example of the sort of work the Thompson Center seeks to do in bringing together people from opposite sides of the political aisle to explore complex policy questions. If you're interested in that yourself, and I suspect you are if you're here, please check out our other offerings, all of which are free and almost all of which are live streamed and recorded. It's my pleasure now to introduce Simon Bronner, former Dean of the College of General Studies and Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences at UW-Milwaukee. Dean Bronner has degrees in political science and American studies from Binghamton University and Indiana University, where he was a Rockefeller Foundation Fellow. He has taught at Harvard University, Penn State University, Leiden University in the Netherlands, and Osaka University in Japan. He is the author and editor of over 40 books on American cultural, ethnic, and political history and sociology, including, most recently, Americanness, Inquiries into the Thought and Culture of the United States, Youth Cultures in America, and Exploring Traditions, Folk Behavior, and Modern Culture. He has also written for major national newspapers, including the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Forward. His recent research is on the political and cultural effects of globalization. Please re-welcome Dean Bronner.
Thank you very much, and there is a handout out front if you want to know more about the Thompson Center. I want to introduce our featured speakers in alphabetical order for tonight's forum on American education. Arne Duncan served as U.S. Secretary of Education from January 2009 through January 2016 as part of the Obama administration. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Duncan served as Chief Executive Officer of Chicago Public Schools. From 2001 to 2008, Duncan won praise for uniting the city's stakeholders behind an education agenda that included opening 100 new schools, expanding after school, summer learning, early childhood, and college access programs, dramatically boosting the caliber of teachers and building public-private partnerships around a variety of educational initiatives. Our Festival of Books wants to draw your attention to Duncan's work as an author. He's the author of How Schools Work, an inside account of failure and success from one of the nation's longest-serving Secretaries of Education, published by Simon & Schuster. Secretary Duncan currently leads Chicago CRED, which stands for Create Real Economic Destiny, a nonprofit trying to achieve a transformative reduction in gun violence in Chicago through partnerships with local business leaders, community organizers, and nonprofit groups. Duncan aims to provide outreach, therapeutic, education, and employment opportunities for the young men most likely to be engaged in gun violence. He's also the managing partner of Emerson Collective, an organization dedicated to removing barriers so people can live to their full potential. Secretary Duncan is a lot taller than I am, and you will notice that besides graduating magna cum laude from Harvard University in 1987, majoring in sociology, he served as co-captain of the basketball team and was named a first-team academic All-American. Margaret, hang on, Margaret, hang on. Far end, yeah. Margaret Spellings served as U.S. Secretary of Education in the George W. Bush administration from 2005 to 2009, leading the implementation of the No Child Left Behind Act, a bipartisan initiative to provide greater accountability for the education of 50 million U.S. public school students. As Secretary, she also launched the Commission on the Future of Higher Education, a plan to address challenges of access, affordability, quality, and accountability in our nation's colleges and universities. Prior to serving as Secretary, Spelling served as White House Domestic Policy Advisor from 2001 to 2005. Her achievements include oversight of the development of the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, the development of a comprehensive immigration plan to ensure long-term economic stability and to secure U.S. borders, and numerous other initiatives on health and human services, transportation, labor, justice, and housing. You've been busy. You can read of her vision in her authorship of A Test of Leadership, Charting the Future of U.S. Higher Education, and American Dream 101, The Future of Higher Education in America, among other publications. She currently serves as president and CEO of the Bipartisan Policy Center, bringing her knowledge and experience developed over an exceptional career in public service at both the state and national level. This followed her work as president and CEO of Texas 2036, a data-driven bipartisan think tank addressing the most pressing issues facing Texans. Prior to that, she served as the president of the 17-institution University of North Carolina system, leading the state's public university into a new period of performance, affordability, and growth, with a focus on improving economic mobility, ensuring accountability, and advancing the public good. Spellings also served as president of the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, Texas, where she oversaw programs on economic opportunity, education reform, global health, and special initiatives on women's leadership and military service. Her work included the 2014 launch of the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, a one-of-a-kind leadership program born out of the first-ever partnership of multiple presidential centers. Thank you both for participating in this forum, and please welcome Secretary Spellings. Sit in the middle. I'll begin in a moment with questions that I prepared, and I want to recognize the input that many of you put into the registration in the audience and other colleagues from UWM at Waukesha. Well, I'm going to begin with the elephant in the room, so to speak. The U.S. Department of Education, which you both led, is making front-page headlines. On March 20th of this year, President Donald Trump signed an executive order calling for the department's, quote, closure and return of authority over education to the states and local communities. His reasoning was that the department is wasteful and polluted by liberal ideology. Those are my words. Can you give us an overview from your experience of the department's authority over education and your views on the controversy?
All right. Hello, everybody, and it's great to be here at the Thompson Center. I worked for Governor Bush, who became the president, and he and Governor Thompson served together, and my former boss is famous for nicknames for people, and Governor Thompson's was Double T, Double Tough, which, of course, is the moniker for Texas Tech University also, but anyway, I was privileged to serve with then Secretary Thompson in the Bush administration, and it's great to be here, so give him my regards. I also worked for a boss who was a Republican who famously, and maybe singularly, did not call for the abolishment of the Department of Education. He used to say that when people heard abolish the Department of Education, they often heard abolish education. And I think none of us would be in this room if we didn't have the opportunity to pursue our path and our dreams through education. That's what this place is all about, obviously. So what the Department of Education does, based on its history from the founding of a federal role during the Civil Rights era, the LBJ era, and then through the creation of an independent freestanding department in the Carter administration, is really aligned around a shared American thesis, which is about opportunity. That irrespective of zip code or geography, all Americans should have that opportunity for a quality education and a path into higher education. That has been our thesis. And so the federal role is primarily on the K-12 side of the house, focused on low-income students, special education students, civil rights enforcement, some things around teachers and the centrality of that, workforce and so forth. On the higher ed side, and the biggest part of the Department of Education, is about the financing and students' support, financial support for students, largely low-income students, but not solely, through this big bank in Washington at the Department of Education that is FSA, the financial aid part of it. And so that's what the Department of Education does. I personally worried that some of this is sort of red herring stuff because, as you all know, because you fund it, your local schools are supported by state and local tax dollars primarily. 9 cents on the dollar comes from Washington, with this thesis around opportunity in particular populations. And so woke ideology, if there is same, is coming from states and local school districts and book lists and all those sorts of things. And maybe sometimes it does, but the people you need to see about that don't live in Washington. In fact, there are express prohibitions for curriculum mandates and the like. So that was a long answer, but you gave me the opening tutorial I had to do.
I think on everybody's mind.
And again, so appreciate the opportunity, and it's just a real pleasure to be able to do this with Margaret Spellings. I was her successor. We'll agree on a lot tonight, maybe to much of your consternation. We'll disagree on some things, but I never doubted her heart. I never doubted why she was there. I knew her commitment. And those jobs are sort of lonely jobs. You're the only one in the country. To have someone like her I could reach out to and get advice from is something I always so appreciative of. So just try and quickly give a little history lesson why I think today is an unprecedented time and, frankly, for me, pretty scary. Let me give you I'll be quick, history of what Republican presidents have done for education. So our nation's first Republican president, President Lincoln, during the Civil War, created the land-grant universities, absolutely transformational. Fast forward to the last 70 years, President Eisenhower, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, actually put education on the federal map. President Ford, IDEA, more funding for children with special needs, 7.5 million children across the country, helping them. President Nixon, lots of challenges with President Nixon, but guess what he signed into law? Pell Grants, absolutely transformational for our country. Many of the students that we talked to earlier today on Pell Grants right now. Reagan, A Nation at Risk. Bush's, who she worked for, No Child Left Behind, pushed accountability in a way that had never happened before in our nation's history. So I would say education should be the ultimate bipartisan or nonpartisan issue. For me, there's nothing left to right about fixing the dropout crisis and more kids learning how to read, more kids having a chance to go to college. That's not what this is about. This is an attack on education, and that really scares me. And just to echo what Margaret said, the real fair question is, what does the department do? And it does it imperfectly, and she made mistakes, and I made mistakes, and it's not about perfection by any stretch. What the department basically does is add additional resources for our nation's most vulnerable students. So she said 90% of the funding K-12 comes state and local. It's just 10% additional. What is that for? It's more money for children to have a chance to go to pre-K, who need a chance to be able to enter kindergarten ready to read, ready academically and socially and emotionally. Money for children who live below the poverty line, Title I. I talked about IDAs, children with special needs, 7.5 million across the country, more money there. More money for rural students. And the biggest thing is a massive amount of money to make college more affordable, grants and loans, Pell Grants we talked about. And so if any of that gets touched, that just hurts our nation's most vulnerable children who need the most help. And I'll close. I just got back from Mississippi 2 weeks ago. In Mississippi, because the state doesn't fund education that much, 95% of the funding for children with special needs comes from the federal government. 95%, because the state hasn't done its fair share. So think what happens to vulnerable children in Mississippi if, and it hasn't happened yet, but if that somehow gets attacked or threatened, that would break my heart.
Thank you for that overview. The driving question of this forum is on fixing America's public schools and colleges. It presumes a problem. What do you see as the problem or issues with public education today, and how they could be addressed or resolved?
Start. Well, this was a major focus of mine in office, and you know, that was about 15 years ago, this commission report that you referenced, Simon. And you know, I think our findings at that point are more true today than they were then, and that is that, you know, the three things were access. I mean, do high school students have a reasonable expectation that they can be successful in post-secondary education? Can they read well enough? Are their math skills strong enough? I mean, you teach them every day, and I bet you over the course of your career, thinking about how long that might have been, you may have seen some erosion in those skills, the ability to write and communicate and those things. So are they ready to be successful, number one? Secondly, can they afford it? And of course, this is where the federal government has had a major role. But, you know, in my day, and I'm not that old, but, you know, and Arnie too, you know, state supported higher education to the extent that you could sort of pay retail. I mean, it wasn't $5.29, this and that, you know, pay for decades and decades for your child to attend college. And our public universities were pretty darn affordable. That has changed. And then thirdly, accountability. You know, do people who are paying these big bucks have an expectation that what they're learning there has some value in the marketplace? And so I think over the time, and there's obviously some truth underneath this, that people are perceiving. I ran the University of North Carolina system, one of the finest systems in the country, I might add, where people started to think, what are they doing up there? I mean, are they making my Republican kid a Democrat? Or, you know, and so it has taken a life of its own about what is the value, what's happening, a lack of transparency, a lack of understanding about what you're going to be able to do with large levels of debt. And so that stew of issues is still real, and I think it is we who lead higher ed need to own a lot of that problem and start to tackle it on all three fronts.
So if you look at the recent NAEP scores that were very disappointing but not surprising, we have a reading crisis in this country. So to say that everything is okay would be extraordinarily dishonest. And in a flat world, high-wage, high-skilled jobs can go to the most educated workforce, the most educated country. And I want those jobs to come to our communities and our states and our country and not go to other places. So we have, for lots of reasons, we have to get better. I'll do K-12 first in higher ed. On the K-12 side, what sort of kills me is that if I asked any of you today, what are our goals for our nation educationally, I don't know if you could give me a coherent answer. We lack goals as a country. And everything I've done, whether it was, you know, basketball or, you know, work in the corporate world or not, working in Chicago Public Schools, I had goals. You didn't always make your goals. I fail a lot, but I always had goals. So I think we need some goals that aren't left or right, or they're nation-building goals, and I'd say more access to high-quality pre-K, raising third-grade reading scores, trying to raise high school graduation rates, and trying to lead the world in college completion. I'll just throw those 4 goals out as a starting point. Secondly, we need some strategies to achieve those goals. And it's a big country. We both travel to all 50 states and hundreds of schools, and what works well in rural Alabama may not work well in inner-city Chicago. But we need to have some strategies to try and achieve those goals and see what works best for kids. Third, you need some metrics. You need to be able to measure how you're doing. And this is what she and her team did so extraordinarily well, is not hiding behind the aggregate of a class of kids or a school, but looking at subgroups. How are poor kids doing? How are black kids doing? How are special need kids doing? We need to measure. And then finally, we need public transparency. We need to be talking about these things twice a year or every year. So right now, I would argue as a country, we have no educational goals. We have no clear strategies to achieve them. We have no metrics to measure them. And we don't have any public transparency. So we're lost. And we do our kids and our country a grave disservice. And for me, if we came up with some goals, those goals could last for the next 25 years. And the strategies to achieve them could vary with leadership at the state level and local level, at the national level. But if we could stay the course on those goals, I think for the next generation, that would be huge. My radical idea on higher ed, which folks can throw tomatoes at me, or any of this stuff you can throw tomatoes at me on. But hundreds of billions of dollars that we put out, Department of Education, every single year to higher education. All of it is based upon inputs. It's based upon student enrollment. Zero was based upon outcomes, students graduating. And for me, the goal for young people is never to go to college, it's to complete college. And debt without degree is a really tough space to be in. So we tried and failed, and we got massive pushback from the left and the right. I just wanted to shift a little money behind universities that were taking first-generation college goers and high numbers of Pell Grants and not having them apply and attend, but having them graduate. And there's no incentives at the federal level to reward those universities that are really driving the economic mobility. So I would love to fundamentally change that. Easier said than done.
Well, let me follow up about outcomes. Part of the complaint at the national level is that student proficiency in K through 12 lags behind that of other countries. Although President Trump claimed that the U.S. is dead last in education, while at the top of the list in cost per pupil, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as the nation's report card, said that the U.S. ranked number 8 out of 41 countries in educational attainment, with disciplinary measures of 5th in reading, 10th in science, and 22nd in math. Still, parents and civic leaders, and there are district superintendents out in our audience tonight, are not satisfied with these figures. Could we do better? And if so, how?
We can and we must, absolutely. And I was really interested when President Trump signed the executive order in the White House with the kids all around him. He, talked all about the NAEP data, the National Education Report Card data, where they have, laid off a bunch of people and are really skinnying that down. And, we cannot set goals, run the ship of state, or do anything without information. And we are in a reading crisis in our country right now. Things were starting to go south before COVID, and then obviously we are flat to declining, with some exceptions like Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana, who are leading the way. So this transparency, this accountability, this looking at the data, and this lighting a fire of urgency around this issue. And so that takes leadership, it takes presidential leadership, it takes bipartisan leadership, but I'm pretty optimistic that we can get there again. We have. I mean, it was the governors who led us in the Reagan administration, that nation at risk and all of that, into this era of expectation around reading and math. And so we ought to be concerned about it. We know what to do. We have the brain research. We know how to teach little children to read. We're just not doing it everywhere. We're not putting our best teachers in the most challenging places. So, it's hard, but it's not complicated. And, if we really had the will to do it, I'm confident we could.
Yeah, I'm really challenged by not his complaint about the NAEP scores, because we've all said it's unacceptable, and whether we're 8th or 18th, our goal should be to be first. Our goal should be to lead the world. We're not close to that. But it's just interesting. Again, this is a sophisticated audience. Think about, just a quick analogy, a metaphor. Think if education was a business, K to 12, and as we both said, that 90% of the investment comes at the local level, at the state and local level, and only 10% comes at the federal level. So I'm never one to point fingers or lay blame, but if you had a company that was struggling, would you attack the 10% investor, or would you challenge the 90% investor? So it's not honest.
I'm going to steal this little analogy.
You can take it, take it. I just really want folks to think about that. So we can talk about a problem, but let's talk honestly. The second thing, so you could actually make a case you need a larger federal role, not a smaller, to drive this. And then if you guys do your homework, if you look at those countries that are out educating us, they're out competing us, there's not a single one that has a federated system of education. It's in their nation's interest. A strong military is our best defense. A good education is our best offense. It's our nation's interest. They don't rely on 50 states to do it by themselves or 15,000 school districts to do it by themselves. It's too important. So I challenge that fundamental sort of assumption. Having said that, what would you do to fix it? super easy answers, but we talked earlier today, I would do a lot more high dosage tutoring. We got to help a generation of kids catch up. Districts that have done it, it's worked, and I would give more time. Generally, K to 12, time is the constant in America, and learning is the variable. And that's broken. I want to flip that. I want time to be the variable and learning to be constant. And kids that are behind need a lot more time after school, Saturdays, Sundays, summers. For any of us to get good at anything, we just have to work a little bit harder. We need that. The hope, again, what Margaret said is so important. I just came back from Mississippi 2 weeks ago. Mississippi, we know struggles on every category, on everything. They call it the Mississippi Miracle. It's no miracle, but over 20 years, they went for fourth grade reading on the NAEP, went from 49th in the country to first for low-income children. 49th to first. 20 years of hard work. No overnight miracle. So if you can help poor children in Mississippi go from 49th to first, think what you can do in Wisconsin, in Illinois, and every other place. We know what's possible. It's not some theory. This is happening right before our eyes.
Exactly.
Let me turn to the issue of the teaching profession. Both of you, as secretary, produced reports on teacher quality and the profession. A national survey of K through 12 schools just last year revealed that 86% of public schools have teacher shortages and are struggling to hire educators. In Wisconsin, the Department of Public Instruction reported that Wisconsin education workforce is, quote, in crisis as a result of 4 out of every 10 first-year teachers leaving Wisconsin or the profession after just 6 years. Meanwhile, many parents blame the quality or method of teachers as a problem, putting more pressure on teachers and administrators. What can make the teaching profession more attractive, and what can improve teacher preparation and effectiveness?
You should start on that.
I got a lot of ideas. I think the profession is not that the people are broken, but the system is pretty broken. And sometimes it takes a crisis, seeing that as an opportunity to think about it very differently. So let me give you a couple pieces. I think, and this is a broad statement, not totally fair, I think too much of teacher preparation is the theory of education and the philosophy of education and the history of education, and not enough how do you actually teach 30 diverse learners in a classroom. I've really looked at the medical model, which is a residency model, where medical students spend a year in residency working with master doctors. I would love to see teachers, before they all have their own classroom, do a year of residency with a master or mentor teacher to really hone their craft. I would pay teachers a hell of a lot more money. I would pay principals a hell of a lot more money. I think it's the best investment we can make. I went to schools all over the country, many amazing, some break your heart. I've never yet been to a great school that didn't have a great principal. I keep looking for it. I don't know if I'm going to find it. Great principals attract and retain talent. Bad principals repel that talent. They're threatened by it. They scare them off. So, double principal pay, double pay for teachers. Every teacher job is not the same. Talked about what do you do to help poor kids. We have nothing that incentivizes great teachers and great principals to work with our most challenged communities, be that inner city urban or rural or remote or Native American. Again, these are all controversial. I would have pay differential. And if the job is more challenging, you get more money, there's an incentive to do that. In fact, we have all the incentives to do the opposite, to go to wealthier districts where the pay is better and the class size is smaller and the technology is better. And if we believe, which I think we both believe passionately, that great teachers change lives and great principals create schools that are extraordinary, we have to create incentives for the best talent to go where it's needed most. And the final thing is, and again, this is all controversial, and this would not, in my mind, disempower unions, but what we have is, we have a contract where it takes 25, 30 years to get to the top of the pay scale. And a lot of young people today aren't going to do any job for 25 or 30 years. They're going to work in 5 or 10 or 15 different jobs. And so what every district now has is a singular contract. And I would think about 2 different tracks. One would be a traditional one like we have of lane and step for the next 35 years, and you could opt to do that. Or you could do a higher risk, higher reward contract, where if you were really demonstrating outcomes for your students, I'm making this up, you could make $100,000 by the time you're 29 or 30. And you could choose. No one would tell you, and the union can negotiate both those contracts. But I think if we want the next generation to go into teaching, no one goes into it to make $1 million, but they shouldn't have to take a vow of poverty either. And I think there should be a way, if they wanted to take on a challenging job and get compensated for that, or to be an extraordinary teacher changing kids' lives, and to make a lot more money much more quickly in your career journey, your career path.
Okay, I want to associate myself with that laundry list. In right-to-work states like Texas and North Carolina and others, but they've had the flexibility to do some of this pay-for-performance stuff and incentives stuff more easily than in more union-bound environments. I want to associate myself with all of that, but I also want to operate in the real world, which is, would you like to be a teacher today, given all of this? I mean, people are washing out, they're aging. It is a hard job, and I'm not sure that we can, do it this way and meet the demands of this generation and the level of skill that has to be attained. To Arnie's point about the contracts, it's a one-size-fits-all, 185 days, 190 days, whatever your school year is defined in your state, and, take it or leave it with very restrictive conventions and requirements. And we don't operate anything else like that. We say, man, Simon, maybe you ought to come down here and teach in the fall semester in our, senior level American history class, et cetera. So we have this generation of talent in the boomers. Arnie, are you one of us?
I am.
Okay, good. I knew I liked you. Anyway, and how are we going to think about getting the right kind of talent capacity wherever it might be? Stop thinking about the strictures and more about what our needs are, and kind of breaking down some of those barriers. In my view, then this is kind of way out there, we're seeing a redistribution of education from kind of the little red schoolhouse and vast majority of people going to public schools, and that is eroding over time through charters, and I'm for a lot of this stuff, by the way. I don't want to have people mistake that, but states around the country are adopting school choice and voucher programs, and so where are we heading just in terms of the operational structures and how we're going to meet the demands of kids wherever they might be, and how are we going to preserve our common ideals as Americans in a system that's much more diffuse.
Thank you for that. You might want to give that to Arnie.
I'm good. Thanks.
My previous questions have centered on K through 12. Let me turn to higher education and whether it needs fixing. Complaints have been raised in recent years challenging the value, safety, and quality of American higher education. The Chronicle of Higher Education reports a 15% enrollment drop nationally between 2025 and 2029, coupled with declining state appropriations for post-secondary education in 37 states. The Chronicle predicts as many as 80 colleges will close by 2029. The University of Wisconsin alone has announced the closure of 6 campuses, including this one. Forums of the American Council on Education warn that state university systems epitomized by the Wisconsin idea of public access to higher education across the country is in trouble. How can we stem this tide?
Well, I think that we've been hoisted on our own petard a little bit here, Simon, because people have been talking about for the last 20 years, and we have been we in higher education have been very resistant to tell our story, to talk about the value, to evidence things with real hard data, and just trust us. And people, we've taken that as far as we can get it. And so we have allowed that narrative of, a lack of confidence really to take hold. At the same time, people have seen and it's a great innovation. You know, stackable credentials, things that are offered in business, community college plus a credential from Amazon plus finishing at a four-year university, this, kind of combo platter of how you chart a trajectory for a higher ed. Brand is mattering less and less and less. And as long as we can evidence, can you get a great education here? Yeah, you can get a great education at Harvard, and this is cheaper than that. So, I think we have to do a better job of talking about, in real terms with real data, what is the value proposition, what is its worth in the marketplace, not just we're going to be better citizens. What is the value and my return on investment, and we need to do it quickly. The other thing I would just say, and I do say to my colleagues in higher ed, at this moment, stop talking about academic freedom and start talking about research and innovation and the kind of tech transfer that goes on in our major public flagship universities in particular that have beget such incredible economic growth in our country. That's how we cure cancer. That's how we, develop, you name it, technology comes from our universities. And so we gotta get a better story, Simon.
And Margaret led a massive system and is much more steeped in this than I have, but just a couple quick thoughts. There are basically no good jobs in the legal economy today if you just have a high school diploma. So for me, everybody has to have some kind of education beyond senior year. If you drop out, you're dead in the water. So whether it's four-year university, two-year community college, trade, technical, vocational training, that has to be the goal for every student. And for me, it's always this false choice of college versus careers. We need a hell of a lot more kids going to college. We need a hell of a lot more getting vocational training and going into the world of work. And we don't have enough of either. So it's not like a competition. And I never want to say, other countries have better systems, but some of them also assign kids at 12 and say, you have to do the voc ed route. I think that's terrible. I want to give kids options and see where your heart is, see where your passion is, and give them a chance to do that. And what Margaret said is that now everyone's going to keep working and learning the rest of their lives. It's not like you're going to finish school at 21. You never, the day any of us stop learning, the day we become obsolete. But we just need a lot more kids doing both of those things. Secondly, I never hear someone who doesn't have a college degree say it's not valuable. It's a very privileged position to say it's not valuable. And we need to add value, we need to tell the story better, there's a lot we need to do. But folks don't get into rooms like this if they don't have a college degree. There's so many doors and so many rooms you can't walk into without a college degree. So I really struggle when people say, you don't need it. They're usually talking about somebody else. They're not talking about themselves or their own children. Often. And then the final thing, you talked about it, U.S. government federal government has a role here, but states have walked back their commitment to higher education, and we need to have better outcomes and better transparency and all of that. But I would just ask all of you as voters, and this is true in this state and the other 49 states, look over the last 20 years what your state has done in terms of supporting higher ed, and look what they've done to support incarceration. And I can guarantee you in basically every state that our taxpayer investment in incarceration goes up and up and up, and our investment in higher education hasn't. And to be clear, I don't blame politicians, I blame us as voters that we allow that value choice to be made.
I want to add one more quick thought, and that is that we have a failed business model in American higher education in the sense that we got a lot of overhead, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to take our existing workforce in higher ed that is tenured, protected faculty in disciplines that may or may not be, quote unquote, market valuable today. And so we're trying to take that big fat apparatus and skinny it down into something that people want to buy, that they see a return in the workplace immediately. And so, I think our policymakers don't recognize how hidebound a lot of the strictures, now we're back to that again, the 185, the contracts and various things that really make it virtually impossible for us to say, we're closing this program there and there. And it's painful, and it's happening all over the country, as you rightly say. But, we have to have some sympathy for the enterprise that has, you can't put 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack, can you, Simon?
I like her use of folklore. Well, our secretaries here were very gracious to say that no topic is out of bounds. So I want to speak to, finally, with my last question before we open it up, another controversy that has erupted that goes back to my first question about the quote-unquote liberal ideology. Headlines are being made about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the schools, both K through 12 as well as our colleges. The Chronicle of Higher Education reports 73 anti-DEI and education bills in 26 different states. And the U.S. Congress has introduced since 2023 23 bills with the reasoning that DEI is intrinsically unfair, while advocates for DEI assert that it helps create a welcoming, learning, inclusive environment. In Wisconsin, the universities of Wisconsin agreed to limit DEI efforts in exchange for $800 million in state funds. What is your perspective on the value of DEI in American education and possible future strategies for addressing the goals, if we have goals, of inclusion in classrooms and demographic shifts in identities in this country?
I want to start with the liberal ideology quote. I know it's not yours. But again, the sound bites really bother me when I don't feel they're grounded in fact. So we both work for the same Department of Education. I started the day after you left, or maybe it was a little couple weeks in between. You may not know the vast majority of employees of the Department of Education are what's called career service. Was it 90%, 95%? What?
Yeah, career civil service.
Career service, so the vast majority. You come in with a small political team, but the vast majority of folks have dedicated their lives to education. So we had the same civil servants, same public service officials who worked for both of us. Did you feel there was a rampant liberal ideology there?
No, I did not.
I mean, it's just not grounded in fact. And what you had was a lot of smart people, not all perfect, challenges like any other organization, but a lot of smart people who had devoted their lives to helping improve the quality of education. And so when you make these blanket statements that aren't grounded in any fact, I'm not going to accept them or defend them or whatever. It's just not honest. And you have people from all kinds of backgrounds and from all over the country who want to help education. And so to somehow, what we're seeing now is villainize them as somehow being the enemy is incredibly disturbing to me. And I would say many of those civil servants, they made me and my team way better. That I learned so much from their collective wisdom and history and understanding how a federal government works, which I had no clue. She came from the White House, from the DPC. I came directly from the Chicago Public Schools. I'd spent almost no time in DC. I needed their knowledge. I needed their expertise. And I'm forever indebted. And it's heartbreaking. I've been making calls, not every day, but pretty consistently to folks who have a 20, 30, 35, 40-year careers who were given a half hour to leave their office. And for me, it's such a heartbreaking thing to see happen. So this is very personal. To try and answer your other question, again, I'm speaking personally. For me, and I've been part of some extraordinary teams. I'm on a lot of nonprofit boards, on a couple corporate boards of educational teams and administration, basketball teams. The best teams are always the highest performing teams, the highest performance teams have always been extraordinarily diverse. Young, old, different backgrounds, different expertises. When I ran Chicago Public Schools, I had a lot of great educators. I had a CEO work on my team. I had religious leaders work on my team. I had nonprofit leaders work on my team because they all came with different perspectives and again, helped make the team better. And so for me, it's not like politically correct or politically incorrect. If I'm trying to win and I'm really competitive and I want to win basketball games, but I really want to win in education. That's a lot more important. I want to have the best people around me where their strengths are my weaknesses where they see through my blind spots. And the only way I know how to do that is to have people around me who are very different than me.
So, Simon, in my office, I have a little montage of No Child Left Behind, the vote count in the House, the vote count in the Senate, 87-10, and the signing pen and all this stuff. And, you know, first of all, totally agree with Arnie about that. There is no woke ideology coming from the Department of Education because it is strictly against the law. If there is woke ideology, go take a look at your state curriculum, look at the book list in your local school district, and go see the folks there. That is where it is proffered, if it is proffered. But the head scratcher for me is how do we go from 87-10 on something called No Child Left Behind to all of a sudden we're not for any of that. I mean, that's a diversity agenda. Disaggregating data by subgroup, black kids, Hispanic, special ed, female, etc., is a DEI initiative, if you want to call it that we're caring about every kid. So I'm a little flummoxed about, the whole thing. And what I think those of us who are paying attention to this is there's a lot of show. There's a we'll watch the birdie kind of thing going on up here. And I think we all have to be paying attention to what's underneath that. That's A, real and valid, and B, that is, in Texas we say you got to keep the main thing the main thing. And so the main thing for me is not whether the SBA or the Department of Ed should run a loan program, but the main thing is our kids can't read.
Thank you for your candor and your insights. At this point, if we can have some of the house lights come up, and I'll recognize our staff members who hold up your microphones so they can see you.
I think that woke a few people up there, Simon. Everybody was sleeping so soundly.
These are hot topics. You should be provoked. If not woke, provoked. And just be recognized. We have a couple over on this side.
We can repeat the question for those who, yeah. Okay.
First of all, thank you for taking on the political issues, but I'm a 1979 high school graduate from a small school in Pennsylvania. I ended up getting 5 college degrees, but I want to go back to where I started. We had VOTEC. We had 12, 13-year-olds go into the trades, and like they now say, they're doing better than ever. They're happy. I had a basic education. I didn't know any of the political biases of any of my teachers, even through my college. In law school, I had kind of a sense, but it was never in the front of my education. And I feel like I've gotten a better education than my daughters have years later. And, is there, what do they say? Politics is too important to be left to the politicians. Education is too important to be left to the elite educators who think that, a college degree is everything. If you ever watch a welder or a carpenter or a chef do their thing, that's as good as what I do as a lawyer, and if not better. So, instead of pushing everyone to college, having them go halfway through and have the debt, why not go back to the VOTEC model and not make it a stigma? And the other thing that my small rural school did was they organized people by their capability. If you did well in school, you were in a different section. If you didn't, and that allowed everyone to move at their own pace. And just because someone doesn't read as fast as someone else doesn't mean they're not as intelligent. So I'm just wondering, to the question, is there any chance to go back to the basics? Because again, I don't think I'm alone to say that some of the more senior of us may feel we got a better education than our children did, and it's not just because of poor quality teachers. Thank you. There's a question in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Well,
can we
I
go back
think
to-
you raised the issue about tracking. You raised issues about vocationalism. Wisconsin is a state where the technical colleges are better funded than the state system, so all that comes into play.
I think that this is starting to change. I mean, to Arnie's point, I mean, people are seeing, stackable credentials, tech-related things. To your point, I mean, your job is going to be replaced by AI if you're a lawyer, and the chef is going to be cooking and cooking and cooking. And so, the world is changing, and the market is responding. So I think we did go through a college for everybody kind of period. I think that has very much changed. However, here's a big however. This cannot be a substitute for teaching kids to read and compute at high levels. And in our day, like about your age, there was a tracking thing where Johnny wasn't smart enough. We're going to just sort of decide on Johnny's behalf that he can't. And we still, I think, are a land of second chances and that options are open. And so we owe students of every kind, the basic fundamental skills so that if you want to be a welder, a chef, whatever, or even a lawyer, you can.
Last point. I have a plumber who has a philosophy degree, and he's not that good of a plumber. If he would have gone to trade school for plumbing, it would have been better. And that's true. I mean, it's honestly,
Well, right, and here's the other thing about this. It's not too late. We're all going to be lifelong learners, folks.
thank you.
The basic premise I agree with. I would just go back to what I said. It's not either or, it's both and. I would argue we don't have the majority of Americans do not have a college degree. This has not been college for all. It's still college for the elite. And we have far too few folks who are welders and plumbers and electricians, and they make a lot more money than other things if you've paid any recently. So I just want, again, to have every child have a dream of education beyond high school. Let them figure it out, not be tracked, not be told. And the biggest thing, again, is reading's critical, math's critical. We all have to be lifelong learners. And the day any of us stop learning, we're obsolete. So how do we instill a love of learning, whether it's becoming a master welder or a master philosopher or a master lawyer? How do we instill a lifelong love of learning? Everybody needs that.
Thank you very much for coming. India has more honor students than the United States has students. And companies are going to be going to wherever the best education is occurring. How do we help our young people not only learn, but connect with what is available to them in the future? And you mentioned that people need lifelong learning, but we need to have a structure to help people continue to learn. And we need to have a structure for people who got failed by the system or failed themselves in the system to come back in and learn to read when they're 25 or 30. How do we better do this in our schools and connecting people with what's available to them? Because when I talk to my kids of my friends, they're like, I have no idea what to do or what's available to me when I graduate from high school.
Yeah, again, this is a pretty smart audience. These are great questions, and not easy answers. So I would argue that starting, middle school, maybe elementary school, we need a lot more exposure to a whole vast array of careers. So you can't imagine doing something you've never seen before, don't know. So more job shadowing, more mentoring, more summer internships, and just figuring out what's out there. And whether you come from privilege or whether you don't know anyone who's ever had a real job before, you don't know what's out there. And so working with a very challenged population now, we just try and provide a ton of exposure. And it's amazing. It's, guys figure out what they love and, do that. And a year ago, they didn't even know that career existed. So that exposure is so desperately important. On the challenges, just always trying to be honest, we are struggling as a nation educationally. We've said that. That's apparent. We're not honest about it, though. We're not honest, and that's what No Child Left Behind tried to do. And there's a small nonprofit called Learning Heroes based in D.C. Let's be very quick. They've polled parents in like six different places. Numbers aren't exact, but basically in the 6 different, mostly urban areas where they polled across the country, 85 to 90% of parents think their children are on track, and in fact, 25 to 30% are. So there's a massive not a perception gap, it's a reality gap. It's a truth gap. And I just think we need to be much more honest with parents that, your son is 2 grade levels behind. And we're going to work as hard as we can together, and we need you to do that. But many, many parents think their kids are doing okay and they're not. And for me, losing their advocacy, I've worked with all kinds of parents, every parent, educated, not educated, functional, dysfunctional, they all want the best for their kids. But you got to talk to them. You got to let them know. And it's just, for me, it's just heartbreaking. We sort of neutralize parents as advocates and partners. I talk about more time, and they could help on summer school. They could help read to the kids. They could help take the phones away. They could do all that. But unless we're honest with parents about where their kids are, there's this false sense of security that everything's okay and everything's not okay. And I just think we need a huge dose of honesty. It's going to be a bitter pill to swallow. It's tough medicine, but I think we really, really need that as a country.
I'm going to add, just on the higher ed side, the same thing. I mean, we shouldn't be letting students take $250,000 worth of debt at a private school for a degree, fill in the blank. I can name some of them. I'm not going to do that because it make people mad. But that has virtually no value in the workplace, and even more of a crime if the person does not complete. And so it's just a bad deal, folks, and we taxpayers are subsidizing that. It is a lifetime of debt that hangs over those students. And why? Because we in higher education are trying to keep our business model alive. And that's just, we're not being honest with the folks on either side of the house.
There, I see one there and a couple over there. Adam, or go ahead.
Hello. So my career of choice for my future is to be a special education teacher. Yes. And I wanted to talk about the No Child Left Behind. My question is, how do you think it impacts public perception and equality in Wisconsin when private schools in Wisconsin receive up to 90% reimbursement for special education costs, while public schools are only reimbursed at a 33%? Do you think its funding is fair or justified? Thank you.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of state policy in there, a lot of federal funds. I mean, Arnie talked about how in Mississippi, most of the support is coming from the federal government, so that's going to vary widely around the country. But the reason that happens, I will just say, is because parents with severely disadvantaged students can't find or don't believe they can find the kind of support and services they need in their traditional K-12 schools. And so our, top line mandate, if you will, is to serve kids, individual education plans, as you know well, as a student in this realm. And so that's how you get to a place like that. But again, you know what? I love that you know that data. And so that's a thing that we have to talk with policymakers about, and how that all looks. And what are the outcomes? Is that 90% support that's happening in private schools netting a better outcome? I don't know. I mean, why? That's a knowable known. So again, the discussion has to be had where the action is, and it's at the state and local level. We can rail about Washington. We sure can and do.
On this side. Go to that side.
Yeah, look at this.
We're nonpartisan, right and left.
I've worked in special ed administration for about 23 years, and I would thank both of you for No Child Left Behind, what that changed and Race to the Top, I think, in the Obama administration. But I think a lot of these effects just really slowly came into effect within the last 5 to 6 years. I know for special ed in Wisconsin, we got to a point where we were looking at like 50% compliance, 50% outcomes at the time of the pandemic, and that's kind of set us back at that point in time. The other thing, along with that, when I've looked at some of the data, what is it? I think New York gets about 7% federal reimbursement. Here in Wisconsin, we're about 11.8%. But like Secretary Duncan had mentioned, you look at, I think in Mississippi, it's 33% overall, probably higher for special ed and things like that. Right. So it's really taken a long time to kind of what I think build consistency. And we're looking at all the different subgroups and things, and we've worked on that. But what could be broken now with the changes that have slowly brought this to the point we're at? And how can we keep that consistency with the current political reality?
You want to start? Okay, well, I am going to be a Texas braggadocio on behalf of myself and my friend Artie Duncan. Look, when we use the federal role in a, yes, more muscular but discreet way where we said we care about every kid, we're going to test them every year, we're going to report it, and we're going to cause something to happen. We're going to ask you to cause something to happen. From 2000 to 2015, do not take my word for this. Go look at the NAEP data. I'm talking about fourth grade math. We were going like this, and you know it. And then we went like this. And it started before COVID, and it was a bipartisan effort to get up the hill, and it's a bipartisan effort going down. And so I do despair that this kind of culture that we started to build of expectation is really eroded. And now we're talking about the SBA running the loan program as opposed to the kids you're talking about.
Very, very quickly, just amen. And I think it's two things for all of us as taxpayers and citizens and parents to follow. One is we have to follow the money, understand the funding. But for me, money's a piece of the answer. It's not the answer. It's outcomes. It's accountability. And are we getting results for those resources? And again, there are always places that are doing extraordinary, and there are also places where that money is not really benefiting kids. And we got to be honest on both sides of that. And I think both parties of late have really taken their eye off the ball.
Okay, so I am a child psychology major, and I have an older sister who is a high school teacher in Minnesota, and she's still paying off debt from 20 years ago, if not longer. And I know you mentioned incentivizing teachers to work in, how did I phrase this? Less provided schools, in schools where they need good teachers to like help the students more. And she's a really good teacher, but she's still paying off like debt from forever ago, and like it's not going away.
Yeah.
So how would you kind of, what would your idea be for just kind of lowering, like either like incentivizing to work at like schools that are closer to poverty and such, when the debt for going to grad school, going into education is so high?
You were the one with the incentives.
So two things. I mean, yeah, we talked about incentives. First of all, please thank your sister for what she's doing. I'm thrilled. The children's social and emotional needs now are off the charts, and so what you're going to do is going to be extraordinarily impactful. So you should have her check. There's something called public service loan forgiveness that we put in place, that after 10 years of public service, whether it's a teacher or a nurse or someone working in public defender's office, you got all those loans forgiven. Has that been gutted yet?
No, and there's a lot of bipartisan energy, income-based repayment, so
Yeah.
that your debt
Yeah.
is forgiven along your likelihood to make a living.
So just check it quick before it goes away. That's
Yeah.
all I, have her check it. But that exists. We put in place for anyone doing 10 years of public service, all their debt is forgiven.
But also, we got to get on the front end of that. I don't know where she went to school, but, if you're going to an expensive, elite, private school to become a, person working in a, relatively low paying, that's not a good value proposition, and you shouldn't have done it in the first place. And I'm not, but should have told her the truth, Okay, well, all right, it cost some money. A darn good school.
Actually, I have two questions. My name is Larry Dukes. I'm on the Pewaukee School Board. So I have a question though for you. You referenced the states of Alabama and Mississippi, and I think in both math reading they made some gains in performance. What are the major takeaways that can be applied from their work across the nation?
And Louisiana too, I'll throw them in. Okay, there's something, the brain researchers now, 30 years ago, you probably know this, helped us figure out how little children learn to read through research. And it's phonics and phonemic awareness and print awareness and practice and, so we know what the cookbook is. The problem is that our teacher prep programs often don't have the cookbook or won't use the cookbook. And so what they did, they have state laws, and these are passing all over the country that said, you must do that. We're auditing, syllabi in our teacher prep programs. We're having coaches. We're going to have a curriculum that's derived around that. We're going to get rid of something called 3 queuing systems, that was very fashionable in the 80s and so forth. So we're going to throw out the curriculum that wasn't working, and we're going to do what we know works, and we're going to stay on it and implement it. That is what they did. And my state has a good law, but has not had good implementation. And states that are that size, literally they're driving around once a week and saying, are you doing that? So it's fidelity of implementation around research practices. And check out where your teachers are coming from and what their prep programs are.
Quick add. I just came back from Mississippi. It's fascinating. Again, for poor kids, 49th in the country to first. It's like, blows your mind. Couple things. They had one metric they focused on, which was 4th grade reading. They didn't do everything else. They just laser focused there. Secondly, they studied the science of reading. It breaks my heart what's happening with the Institute of Education Sciences now, which is being gutted. They consumed all that research and applied it. They did their homework. Third, it was a public-private partnership. They had outside private funding, wealthy philanthropists there, the Barksdale's family was absolutely committed. And that sort of accountability inside and outside was huge. And the fourth thing is they talked about, the Mississippi Miracle. They've been at it for 20 years. They've had ups and downs, mistakes, but those 4 things, one metric, studying the science, public-private partnership, staying the course, it's pretty remarkable.
So the second question I have, and it's just because I'm thinking that you guys have pretty good access to people that are working on this intently. So what role should the use of the artificial intelligence or AI play in addressing the education of children, again, in the United States?
Be my guest, Arnie.
And I shouldn't even say it, but did you see what the current Secretary of Education said about this 2 days ago? Okay, she was talking about A1, the steak sauce. A1. At an ed tech conference. I can't make this up. So whether it's AI or A1, what I always think is, I don't think technology is the panacea. I think technology is an extraordinarily important teaching tool. And the idea of every child having a personalized tutor, an individual tutor that knows their strengths and weaknesses, that can coach them, that can help them, whether, again, you come from a wealthy family or come from a family that's dirt poor, I think technology can be an extraordinarily helpful tool. My concern is that historically technology has gone to the wealthier families, the wealthier school districts, and it's actually exacerbated the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And so for me, it's a critically important tool. I just want to make sure it's ubiquitous. I want to make sure that the kids who need it the most have the greatest access. And that's up to us.
This is a name droppery thing. I interviewed Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA, a couple months ago. And we talked a little bit about this. And what he said was, and this is right, the person who can channel AI is that person who can frame a query that is precise and literate and learned. Otherwise, you get a junk answer. And so, we can't keep, we got to keep the main thing, how to communicate with a machine that can cure cancer. But that fundamental ask is what we have to do. Buy A1, go long on A1. I can't believe you told that story. Look on the internet, folks.
My question is about something that I don't know if anyone researches this. But it seems to me that education used to be a lot more local. You got up, you walked to school. And with the consolidation in these super large, Texas is very good at that. I was born in Terrell, right? We had the mega schools. It makes for great sports teams. It makes for good publicity. But the local schools in UW Waukesha, and I will not call it UWM at Waukesha, this UW Waukesha was a local treasure. And the local campus is the center system. Has anybody researched whether the bigger schools have a better impact on kids if they have the same quality of teachers? Does size matter in education?
There's a guy, Tom Van Ark, who did the Gates Foundation about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, had this big kind of school within schools, basically your thesis. Too big is not helpful, and we need to break it down, and if we're gonna have big plants, you can have a school within a school. And they did do a lot of research around it, and the bottom line was, didn't matter that much. Costs a lot of money to do that, kind of like class size. Class size reduction is expensive and often doesn't really pay big dividends. But that is what they found then. Who knows now, but do you remember that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'll give you just a different take on a different question. Again, this is my personal thing. I don't have all the data and science. I don't like a lot of transitions in schools. And elementary to middle to high school, that's sort of the norm in America. I would love to have less transitions. I'd love to have more K to 8 schools, more K to 12 schools. I went to a K to 12 school, and the mentoring I got from the high school students when I was in middle school changed my life. And so it's a different question than you're asking, but it's just how do we set up our schools? And I think transitions are very difficult for kids, and we lose kids in those transitions. So for Chicago, we had almost no middle schools, and I think a lot of our academic gain may not have been that much academic gain. It may have been other districts losing during those transitions that we didn't lose.
Also, his mother ran the school. Right?
Good evening. How much do you think the general change to a consumer model of education in K-12 has affected student achievement compared to models of decades ago, and does it need to change? It kind of seems like we're trying to please parents more than educate kids sometimes.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if I agree. I said earlier, I don't think we're telling parents the truth, and we need to have much more honest conversations with parents than we do now. I think when you have that partnership of parents and kids and teachers, pretty amazing things can happen for kids. And if we lose any one of the legs of that triangle, things get tough. I don't know, are we trying to please parents too much now? I mean, maybe that's the dishonesty. Maybe that's where I'd say your point. But I want parents to know what's going on with their kids. I want them to buy into their local schools. I'm coming from an urban environment in Chicago. I wanted to have 3 or 4 good options for every parent. Many parents had no good options. And you need a STEM school, you need a fine arts school, you need a math and science school, you need an IB school, and let parents figure out what the best learning environment. If they have 4 or 5 kids, it might be very different schools. So I want to give parents great choices. That's more of an urban strategy than a rural one, and let them figure out what the best learning environment is for their kids. So I'm big on trying to empower parents.
My thesis would be that, that phenomenon probably divides around income. So, in suburban communities, Johnny can do no wrong. In less advantaged communities, it's the kind of stuff the parents are, woefully, undersold about the issues and so forth. So, and when I talk to teachers and teacher groups, they talk about that. The teacher is on trial if the kid's in trouble. That's our fault, parents.
Thank you so much for being here. Oh my goodness, hot mic. I am in my 15th year as a high school English teacher, and I'm interested in your perspective on a more philosophical question, both of you. So, Madam Secretary, you spoke earlier about the market value that we can get out of collegiate degrees. And some anecdata from my own classroom is that largely my students who are the most successful are the students who have been raised with or have an inherent sense of the value of education for its own sake. Sure. And my students who struggle, no matter how brilliant, largely have the belief in education as a means to an end. It's a little frustrating in an AP literature classroom to, have a student who went through the application to get into my class to say, well, what am I going to use this for? It's just to, wipe out a college credit. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what place the question of education for its own sake has in continuing conversations about the value of education, recognizing that we are in a world where market value is a serious and important question for our kids. And then how is that communicated to constituents beyond educators? I think as educators, we all agree that that's an important conversation to have, but my students and their parents don't often recognize that in many cases, education is valuable because it's education, because it's a right, and not just a career path.
Yeah, for its own sake. And I want to be clear that what I was talking about with that market value is at higher ed. I mean, we cannot take $500,000 from people to get a fill-in-the-blank kind of degree that they're going to be, if they're lucky, working at Starbucks and paying for the rest of their lives, et cetera. It's a lie. And so that's what at that level, that's what I'm talking about. And this is why I'm so worried, like Arnie, about kind of the corrosive anti-education, anti-public service, civic care and stewardship that has to be nurtured from birth on in our homes and in our schools. And this shared ethic as Americans about this institution we call public education, where we come together and we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and all of that. But it has to start early. And, the value thing sure comes later, but I think that's incumbent on all of us, on school boards, on parents and community leaders to rebuild and not let this be taken down, because it'll be corrosive for a very long time.
It's a great question. I don't have an easy answer, and appreciate you staying with it this long. It's not an easy time to be in education anytime, and going through the pandemic, going through this time now is super tough, so I appreciate it. I'll just go back to what I said earlier, and I always think some of these things in education for me are like false conflicts, false dichotomies. I often think it's both and, not either or. So I really think whether you want to learn for education's sake or whether you want to learn to be a welder when you're 20, I'll go back, we all have to be lifelong learners. And so for me, it's instilling in everybody a desire to keep learning, whatever your passion, whatever your interest is, that we can't stop. And so that, for me, I think is the bridge between those two worlds, that if you love to learn and you have a thirst for knowledge and you're constantly challenging yourself and you never think you've mastered anything, you're always trying to get better, that's the person that's going to be successful whatever they do. And the person, whether they're brilliant or not, if they think, okay, I took that class or I read that book and I'm done, the world's moving too fast. The world's changed. So that, for me, is the fundamental. If someone loves to learn, they're going to do great long term. If someone thinks they're too smart or it's not that complicated, they're going to be, their shelf life is going to be pretty short.
They'll need A1.
So I'm a graduate of University of North Carolina at Charlotte.
Okay, where are you?
Right here.
Oh, right there, okay, congrats.
So
Okay.
one of the things that being from North Carolina that I thought was really great for our school system was diversity. Also being someone whose family is from Pakistan, diversity I thought played a really big role in the school systems in North Carolina. How can we implement diversity in other areas? And I know, Ernie, you touched on every area is a little bit different, but how can you touch on how diversity plays a big role and how we can potentially have that play a role in other school systems?
Well, in North Carolina, as you know well, I mean, a big part of their diversity, strength is affordability. North Carolina is the most affordable public university system in the country. And it is awesome, really. And they've been at it for a long time, and it's what, well, anyway, I could give you the whole history, but you know. And so why affordability makes opportunity for everybody real. And then guess what? Everybody shows up of every kind, color, and stripe. And so that's, kind of the major building block there. And obviously in Charlotte, it's a major urban community and so forth. But, I think that's what has differentiated them in that way. State support.
These would be the last two.
Hi, I'd like to ask you about absenteeism. How big of a problem is it? Thank you.
Huge. Along with reading, that's the biggest problem in the country right now, chronic absenteeism. So many districts, it's 30 to 40%. 30 to 40%. And we should, for folks that, you define chronic absenteeism as basically missing a month of school a year. And so think if any of us didn't go to work for a month, and we know the kids not showing up are the ones that are already the furthest behind. And it was an issue pre-pandemic, but somehow coming out of the pandemic, school has felt a little more optional somehow. And I can show up 3 days a week and that's okay. And we're always teacher quality, I'm gonna talk about principal quality, but you could have the best teacher if the kid's showing up 70% of the time. How much is that teacher going to accomplish? So for me, it's a crisis. Again, nothing being talked about, by the current administration does anything about teaching a kid to read or bringing more kids back into school. And for me, I would love to have a, AI fix for this. For me, this is like not high tech, it's high touch. It's going to kids' homes, it's sitting on porch steps, it's sitting in living rooms. What are the barriers? Are you babysitting for siblings while mom is working? What's going on? Do you not have food? Do you not have, what's preventing you from going to school? And convincing parents that, if you get a 90 on a test, that's an A. If you have 90% attendance on a 180 school day year, you're missing 18 days of school. You're missing a month. So 90% attendance, that's not an A, that's an F. Your attendance has to be 97, 98. We got to explain this. So I don't ever blame parents. I think we're doing a really poor job of trying to remove every barrier, every thought process, every mentality that somehow 90 or 80 or 7% is okay. It's disastrous. And we have to hit that with everything we have. So home visits, knocking on doors, churches, beauty salons, whatever it is, barbershop, whatever you got to do, churches, you got to reach families where they are and be relentless. We call it relentless outreach. Those kids have to be in school. They don't have a chance otherwise.
To that. Good answer, Arnie.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, maybe this is a good last question. So I'm trying not to be discouraged, tonight and in general. And I'm sitting here, I guess, hearing about all these big systemic things and changes that need to happen, and this is going to have to happen. And my question is, there's a lot of teachers and parents and community members in the audience tonight. I get up every day and work a lot of hours. I have 3 kids. I'm trying to instill into them the value of education, but they also are, just 3 people. It'll take a long time for them to change their role. What can we do? What are 1, 2, or 3 things that we as individuals that you want to tell us? What's the most important thing that we as individuals can do to turn around the state of education?
I love this question, and thank you for asking it. And it is y'all, we gotta power up and be in a half full world, no matter what's going on around us. So you're right. You start with your own family, and you're doing that, and it's hard. And I think, and to Arnie's point about absenteeism, we need to. We're all against stuff right now. We're against the Department of Education. We're against woke curriculum. We're against we got to have a for agenda. What are we for? And ask your school board, ask your congressman, what is it that we have to be for right now? And I think that holding our public policy makers at every level, accountable and responsible for that, and be relentless in asking those questions and knocking on those doors and writing to that letter to the editor. It's a simple question. We know what you're against. What are you for? And what does it mean for the future of our country? And my answer is, we got to be for reading, and we got to make sure that kids feel connected and show up. That ain't complicated. It's hard to do, but I think people can get their minds around that.
It's a great question. I don't have much to add. I just think it's a extraordinarily challenging time, and honestly, for me, scary time in our country. And we need to play at a policy level, and we're talking states and national and federal, all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, all this stuff for me is local. So taking care of your family is like the most important thing. And my kids are a little bit older, but that's still like the most important thing in my life is making sure my kids are on track. And if you can grab one or two other kids, neighbors, whoever, and help them, that's sort of the whole game. And for all the noise and drama and everything going on, kids' needs haven't changed. Like kids still need a lot and probably arguably need more now than ever. And so it's asking a lot to spend a little time on both. You got to figure out how much energy you have. But while we fight these larger fights, if we forget about these kids who aren't showing up to school, doesn't matter what's going on in DC, they're dead in the water. They're not going anywhere. So the power of local, that's where I think the real power is. And it may seem small. I don't think it's small. And the more we can really make sure our loved ones and those around us are going the right way, if enough of us do this, that makes me really, really hopeful about where we can go as a country.
Let's give a big thank you to our Secretaries of Education. And thank you very much for your engagement, your participation. And spread the word. A lot of the people who can be reached by this message are, in fact, not here. So if you go back and tell them what you learned tonight, and I hope the Thompson Center continues this kind of series on these ongoing issues. Good night. Take care. God bless.